Good morning, Tom.
Morning, Joyce.
I recently attended a webinar that you were presenting in, um, announcing, now I'm not sure, you're going to have to correct me on this, about, it may not be the launch, but the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. That's what we're talking about this morning. And I had poked around a little bit in it, but then I started getting even more excited when I heard you speak and when I heard your colleagues speak. So I thought it might be good, not for me alone to go, yes, this is the best thing since sliced bread, but for you to talk about your experience kind of close up and personal with it, and what you're thinking about the value of this archive, and how it might impact us in K-12 libraries and classrooms. But first, Tom, please tell the gang who you are.
Yeah, my name's Tom Bober. I am a elementary librarian in the Clayton School District, which is in St. Louis, Missouri. And I also sit on the American Archive of Public Broadcasting's Education Advisory Committee. I'm one of the co-chairs.
Great. So what was your involvement with this, and what kind of learning happened as a result of your connection on this committee?
So that online portal that you just spoke about, that you were visiting, has been around for, I want to say, about 2 years, but it's really done a lot of growing and changing and adapting over those 2 years. So I had done some work with the Library of Congress, and Alan Gevinson, who's associated both with Library of Congress and American Archive of Public Broadcasting, which I'm going to just call AAPB because that's our quick acronym. And they brought me on to continue some of that work. And in its infancy, that online portal, there was just lots of videos and radio clips that are from the last 6 decades of public broadcasting. So, and it comes from public broadcasting stations from across the country. It's an amazing resource. What they've really added, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I think it's easy to say something like that, but you don't realize what that really means when you say, oh, it's all, public broadcasting. If you think about the various shows that we watch and we rely on, and we have memories of from the Wayback Machine, well, not literally the Wayback, yes. It really is a kind of barometer of the culture of the last several decades, and really live primary sources. What are some of the what is pulled in this archive?
There are, and I'm not going to do it justice, but because I'm going to kind of speak to some of the things that I like to play, the areas I like to play around in. One of the big areas that I love are the news shows that are broadcast. They give you kind of this in-the-moment feel of what's actually was happening at the time, which I love. But you can also find cultural shows, cooking shows, dance shows. It just kind of speaks to what was being watched, as you said. And the other thing, Joyce, that you mentioned is this idea that because it was from across the country, you get all of these wonderful different perspectives. So I can watch some of my old St. Louis shows that I watched. But if you weren't in St. Louis, you never saw these things before. And now there's so many of these that are available through AAPB, and they're adding more on a regular basis, which is really incredible.
There are so many of these shows. There were interviews with people that we read about in history, but you actually get to meet them and hear their voices. That, I think, is fantastic.
One of my favorites that I first ran across, and I think it was the first thing that made me realize, wow, this is really an incredible resource, is they have these special exhibits. And there's a civil rights exhibit where they have all of this programming dealing from the civil rights era. And there is a radio broadcast from, I want to say, about 3 years after Rosa Parks' initial arrest and the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks. The fascinating thing, though, is even though it's dated 3 years later, what it actually is a rebroadcast that was initially recorded about a month after she was arrested, where she's telling her story. And to me, just the timeliness of being able to see that or listen to that and get that story weeks after it happened from Rosa Parks' perspective was just amazingly powerful.
Tom, you mentioned I think that's unbelievable, and how much more alive is history when you get to hear that voice. So there were two things that I was like flipping out about. One were those exhibits.
This is this civil rights one that I mentioned here that has a lot of great depth, and they approach it from several different vantage points. So they look at individuals, they look at moments, and they look at organizations. And so there's different ways to kind of take a look and dig through. There's a lot of resources here. I think the last time I looked, and I think they've done an update to this, there were maybe 4 or 5 dozen different resources that had been pulled in and digitized. And so there was a lot of material to work through. From a librarian's perspective, I love that because there's so much there. I know for some of the middle school teachers that I work with that I've pointed to this, sometimes they've needed a little extra help just because they didn't have the time to go through all of those dozens of resources.
We also mentioned the collections, and these special collections are, I just think they're gems, and they're real interesting curations of materials that many students won't have ever heard of before. You mentioned, Tom, the murder of Emmett Till interviews.
Yeah, I've pointed several teachers, middle school and high school, towards these interviews. One of the reasons is because of the book Ghost Boys and its recent publication and popularity. There are students who want to know more about this event, and they want to know more about Emmett and what happened to him. And these firsthand accounts, these interviews with his mother and others, are really powerful ways to bring them into that moment.
Absolutely. That would be great. And I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that it's really the librarian who will make these connections. If this is a book being read in a class, or you know that kids are reading this book, you can say, have you seen this? This might really enrich your experience in this reading. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the wonderful thing about these collections, many of them have transcripts to the interviews themselves. And so they're actually really easy both to search and to navigate. And so even though most of the interviews are somewhat lengthy, they can be between 20 minutes and an hour, it's pretty easy to point a teacher or students to a specific spot within an interview and get right down to one particular moment if that's what you want to highlight.
Great. And I noticed that so many of these really have connections in the high school curriculum that I would have just gone crazy grabbing for the teachers. And then some of them are really multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, like William Buckley's firing line interviews that I think were 60s and 70s, if I remember correctly. And Tom, in the webinar, I think they said that the elements of these are embeddable. We can bring these into learning management systems, for instance.
There is, and I'll be honest with you, Joyce, I have not done that. There is, and they said that there's a contact that can be a person you can contact through AAPB to get some information on how to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they received a couple of requests if they went ahead and put that up on the website to make it a little bit easier for librarians and other educators to make that happen quickly.
That'd be wonderful. So what else should we highlight about AAPB?
I think one point that you brought up that makes so much sense is that librarians are often going to be the person who is making this connection to this particular resource in so many different ways. I mean, you've pointed out several of them. And I think a librarian browsing the collections, browsing the exhibits, is really an important first step to just have an idea of what might be there, so that when you're having that water cooler conversation, that impromptu collaboration with a teacher, or you walk by a classroom or talk to a student and hear what's going to be happening, you have an idea if this is going to be a great resource for you. It does have those in-the-moment primary sources from the past 6 decades, but it also has wonderful news programs that then look back at earlier points. So it makes a great secondary source as well. And right on what we're looking at right now, for example, the piece about Reconstruction would be a great example of that.
Very cool. And then you just have regular news, as you mentioned here. I just happened on the PBS NewsHour, and it looks like they have gathered featured collections or featured items from major moments in modern history, like the Challenger explosion. And I don't know that many of my high school students really had a great grasp on the movement for the Equal Rights Amendment. So yeah, there's so much here, Tom.
So much there, and you can just do a standard search as well. And so searching for those, these curated pieces are wonderful. I do think sometimes they're just the tip of the iceberg. So if you are one of those educators or librarians like myself that loves to dig deeper, I'm going in and just doing those standard searches, and I'm digging through my search results as well.
So guide me through this. So one thing, there's at least two ways. So one way is you can browse by major topic or theme, and you can see there's LGBTQ, fine arts, global affairs, drama, documentary. And then where's the search?
The search is going to be
on the top, I bet. There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
All right, let's demo it. What should we?
Oh my goodness. Really just any
Civil War? Oh no, that would be not really maximizing the power of this as modern history tool. Cold War, how about that?
That would be great.
And I bet that's a theme as well. But this just points to the idea that there's not just the video, it's the audio.
Wonderful audio, and you'll see some of these have transcripts, others do not. And those are being increased as well, the number of transcripts that are available, which I think makes a really great additional piece for some of our students that can benefit from that.
And you also get all this good metadata. So you have and you have the description that offers context of like, okay, what does this mean? Because I'm a new seventh grader and I'm walking in on this. I did not live through the end of the Cold War. You get permission rights, and I think you get the citations.
The citation as well. Yeah, it's really kind of all here for students to kind of jump right into, and teachers to be able to just share either the site, a curated exhibit, or a specific piece of audio or video that they want students to explore is really you can come in here a lot of different ways. And I think sometimes when you've got these longer pieces like this, you can break them up with groups of students. So you can have students watch in chunks to kind of break apart what's really happening throughout this hour-long video.
I love that. So and honestly, you could also do a jigsaw kind of lesson where people bring in the different perspectives around something. And how engaging would this be? I love this idea. So anyway, let's not belabor this. I think we're all going to be very excited about this. Last words, tips, any other thoughts that we haven't covered, Tom?
I think one of the powerful things about when we think about primary sources or just information that we're asking students to make sense of, one of the benefits of having audio or video is in relation to text is there's an added emotional element. We get a feeling from watching and listening to these things. And I think even if we're watching something political, which could feel very dry, tapping into that idea of what are we feeling, or what is this person emoting as they're sharing with us, becomes important to kind of get that subtext of the messages that are coming across.
Yeah, I agree. And there is so much in terms of visual clues as you're watching some of these interviews, even though they're largely audio experiences. Another thing just to think about is these could be used in projects. And it's not just for instruction. We could have students do the analysis, as you've mentioned, and they could be used in presentations. And they also could be used, we have all these new tools for annotating audio and video. If we gave our students look-fors as they're analyzing text, this is really text. This is the text of our time. And there's no reason why they can't analyze these as they do other primary source types of documents. These could be used in DBQs for AP history, if anybody else knows what I'm babbling about here. So lots of new opportunities with this collection. And so you mentioned it's been around for 2 years. I'm noticing a push out that seems bigger right now. Is there any kind of occasion, or is it a new type of launch?
Well, the Education Advisory Committee is relatively new, and so that group getting together and having conversations about how can we increase awareness, I think, is one of the elements that brought upon the webinar that you had a chance to watch. And I think also just because it's getting to a point where it does feel more refined and much more usable for students and educators, is really, we're at a point where we want to make sure that that educators and students know about this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Tom. I am looking forward to digging in more, and I'm so glad that you helped introduce this to the teacher librarian audience. And then there's the collections I wanted to mention.